The Reserve Bank Governor Michelle Bullock has warned more interest rate rises might be needed to tame inflation, which she says is now homegrown rather than coming from conflicts overseas. In her second last speech of the year, Ms Bullock said domestic cost pressures are now persistent, with demand from consumers exceeding supply. She threatened to use the blunt instrument of interest rate hikes again, with inflation expected to stay higher for longer. The ABC's senior business correspondent Peter Ryan was there last night when Michelle Bullock spoke in Sydney, and he joins us now live. Morning to you. So Michelle Bullock sounds increasingly worried about inflation, doesn't she? What are the chances then of another rate hike to tame it?
Well, good morning, Lorna. Yes, indeed. She was sounding actually a bit more hawkish on inflation than her predecessor, Philip Lowe, who you recall was not exactly the flavour of the month around the country for raising interest rates, but sounding as though, judging by her judgment, that they might need to take aggressive action, given that we're now seeing domestic inflation in things like hairdressing, going to the dentist, those sort of things, business rent, just basic lifestyle things. And up until now, it was pretty much about foreign imported inflation from the war in Ukraine, and also potentially what we're seeing in the Middle East. Now, inflation's currently sitting at 5.4% on the annual rate. We'll be watching out for January the 31st when we'll see the next set of quarterly inflation numbers. But if inflation does tick higher, then, well, you've got to start thinking that they might actually press the rates button. Now, Michelle Bullock, speaking in Sydney in front of Australian business economists, acknowledged that she gets letters from people complaining about rate rises, but said, as you mentioned in the introduction, there's only that one blunt instrument of rate rises, and she concedes it doesn't necessarily concede with many Australians.
I receive letters from people who are finding it difficult to make ends meet, and I speak with organisations who are assisting struggling households. Everyone is seeing prices for goods and services rise strongly, but this has a particularly severe impact on low-income households. This really emphasises the need to get inflation back down. I also know that interest rate rises are squeezing the finances of households with a mortgage. But while the board recognises that there is a wide diversity of experience, the bank's statutory objectives are economy-wide objectives, economy-wide outcomes. And our key tool, the interest rate, is, as we say, it's a blunt one. So the board must therefore set its policy to serve the welfare of Australians collectively.
Peter, I wonder, she's only been in the job a couple of months, hasn't she? What's she doing to put her stamp on the RBA?
Well, Michelle Bullock took over from Philip Lowe in September after the Reserve Bank review had a number of recommendations. Some of that is most likely contributed to Philip Lowe's exit as Reserve Bank Governor. Now, Michelle Bullock says that she 100% accepts all the recommendations. She's busy implementing them. We're going to be seeing next year, instead of 11 board meetings next year, there'll be 8. There'll be a press conference after each one. The meetings on rate deliberations are going to be longer than they currently are. Michelle Bullock was also looking at culture and leadership inside the Reserve Bank, and this was actually a very interesting part of the speech, and I was able to get a question to her about culture and leadership and whether there was any reluctance or resistance from Reserve Bank insiders, and she signalled yes there was, and some of them were going to find it pretty tough as she rolled out the recommendations. But she also told me that her road to the top to become Reserve Bank Governor was not always easy.
I think the problem we've struck is that we have focused on it as being speak up. It's the responsibility of the speakers to. We haven't addressed the issue, which is, are the leaders listening? We haven't managed to nail it in the past. I'm hopeful now that I, leading by example, and I know I've got my executives behind me on this, we are actively looking to change the way we do that. So I think that's going to be the challenge.
And if I may just follow up, did you find those challenges as you worked your career through the Reserve Bank over the years, that difficulty in being able to be confident enough in challenging?
Yes, I did at times. to be honest. And one other thing I would add, and it's to do with diversity and inclusion, is that not all people communicate in the same way. I think there's a whole series of issues around the way we run debate, challenge, which actually isn't very inclusive. It actually excludes people because they don't work in the same way. Sorry, that's a bit philosophical, but that's just my view.
I like it. Thank you.
And that was the Reserve Bank Governor, Michelle Bullock, speaking there in Sydney tonight, and provided some pretty important insights into the Reserve Bank, which, after all, is a very conservative institution. We're learning more about the way the Reserve Bank operates. We're hoping to report more about the way the Reserve Bank operates. Michelle Bullock there very clearly concerned about the way that the Reserve Bank communicates externally. She's going to be making some big changes there, but also internally, as you heard, some of those veteran insiders, maybe from the blokier world that she's come up through, preferring to speak rather than listen, and ensuring that we're getting a bit more diversity and inclusion and hearing from other people who might not necessarily have had a voice in the past. So it was going to be interesting times ahead for the Reserve Bank.